Hey my fellow ink drinkers, welcome to Dark Violet Dreams, where I share my love of books, movies, and other deliciously dark delights. Today, we're talking about books. Surprise, surprise! I am going to share my recent reads, the books that I read in February. Now I'm going to keep this quick because I've talked about these before on this channel for various videos, and I talked about a lot of these over on Instagram. So if you're interested in hearing more detailed reviews, I don't go super into detail because I like to keep people guessing, and I like to keep it open for those who like to dive in blind. But if you'd like more info, I've got Goodreads. I just rejoined Storygraph. I'm still kind of getting to know that one. Not all of the books I read are available on Storygraph because I read a lot of indie, but if you'd like to know about the more popular books or just connect over there because you're not on Goodreads, go ahead and find me. I'd love to be friends with you over on Storygraph. The first book that I finished in February was Solita. I started this in January and I absolutely loved it. It's got all the dark, romantic, gothy vibes that I love, and I learned a few things about a different culture with this book, and there is a second book in this series, so I cannot wait to read it. I will get to it when I can pick up a copy, but I am so thankful that I was able to read this. My friend Stephanie sent this to me last May, I believe, and I am so grateful. Loved it, loved every second, 5 stars. I have no complaints, no complaints. The second book that I finished in February was an arc by Margot Primrose called Diners, Damsels, and Wolves. This is a wolf shifter romance, heavily leaning into the fantasy realm, but definitely focused on the romance. It follows a waitress who is in her 30s. She is taking care of her aunt who has possible Alzheimer's, but she is not convinced by this diagnosis. There's so much spottiness, there's so much that doesn't line up, and it causes her to question the diagnosis. And the main male character comes into the story in a very eventful way. She is being attacked in a parking lot and he saves the day. And then he realizes he really likes her. So he's consistently visiting her at work until he can convince her to meet up elsewhere. And they obviously have a bit of a romance, and that's all I want to give you for that. But I definitely learned a lot about werewolves versus shifters. I do like to dive into a lot of werewolf vampire type stories, but I never gave it a lot of thought when it came to the differences between werewolves and wolf shifters. So that was a lot of fun to learn as well. You just learn something new every time you read, right? Now, Margot Primrose also writes under another pseudonym. So if you're more into the dark fantasy rather than the fantasy romance, definitely check out her series, Legends of Lightning. Love it. The third book that I finished in February was So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison. This was a lot of fun. There was a lot of humor, a lot of musical references. The main character and her best friend had a fun dynamic. And it's basically about this woman who is married. Her husband sends her away on a girls' trip for her birthday, and there's suspicions and whatnot. She puts up with a lot from her husband for the sake of remaining comfortable and living a, semi-quiet life. But things happen on this trip. You may have guessed what might have happened, but this is a fun twist on vampire lore. Rachel Harrison took some creative liberties when it comes to vampires and their origins and things like that, and I had a lot of fun with this. I believe I gave this 4 stars. The last book I do not have with me because my 15-year-old is currently reading it. I figured she'd love this book based off of the things that she enjoys, and so I passed it along to her to read, but I will pop a picture up here, and that is The Night Circus. This is a fantasy book that I received from my friend Amanda back in the day, probably like 2 years ago. So sorry, Amanda, that it took me so long to get to it, but I finally did, and it was so much fun. I can't remember, I think I gave it 4 stars. The first half was not like a full-on struggle, but I wasn't super attached to the story. About the halfway point and on, I really enjoyed it. So that is why I gave it a 4-star rating. The author is amazing at setting up the scene, setting the ambiance, what have you. You really feel like you are part of the story. You feel like you're walking around in this night circus. So the main character is this girl who grew up with magic, and her father wanted to set up this sort of game competition battle type thing with this other magician he knows, and so she was marked and this other boy was marked, and they grew up being trained by their teachers, or aka her father, and for this battle. The scene is set in this night circus. No one else knows what's happening, just those two and their teachers, but it's a long battle. And so that's where I was kind of like, why is this being dragged out? You find out why by the end, and it made perfect sense to me. And so upon a reread, I would probably enjoy it from the get-go. I just had to kind of get to know this world, get to know the purpose of this battle, this magical battle, and I really enjoyed it. It's hard to talk about because there's so much to it, but if you have not read it, I highly recommend it if you like fantasy, anything about magic, anything about carnivals or circuses or that sort of thing. There's a lot that's similar to other circus type stories, but there are some definite creative twists. So I recommend it if you like that sort of thing. And there are some playlists on YouTube Music, and I also came across a really cool ambient video that is based off of the Night Circus. So if I can go back and find that again, I will link it below. So those are the books that I finished. I am still reading Ride Upon Midnight by Robert Weaver. This book is so good. I love everything that he's written, and it took some weird turns as well, so I really like that, and it kind of worked out because I am in the middle of the week of weird, and so I'm counting this towards the week of weird. There's no points or anything, but I just thought, you know what, it fits the vibe, so we're gonna go with it. But there's a lot of musical references in this. I love books that have good musical references, you know, the music I like. And this is definitely hitting that mark. This follows a guy who was wrongly convicted of murder, and he has to go to great lengths to prove his innocence, and that's where I'll leave that. I will also be picking up Anterior Skies for the umpteenth time. I've started and stopped this book so many times, but it fits the week of weird, and so the last time I was reading it, I remember finding out the week of weird was coming again, so I put it back down, and I will be picking it up as soon as I'm done with Ride Upon Midnight. I have kind of a hard time jumping back and forth between books that have kind of similar vibes, and this anthology is definitely of the weird variety, and I have been enjoying it so much. So that's what I'm reading. I have an arc that I'll be reading soon that is more of a experimental historical fiction, which is cool. And so I will talk about that after I read it. That is it. If you would like more information about what I watched and the music I listened to, definitely check out my wrap-up post over on Instagram. You'll see more of that. I just wanted to keep this short and sweet, and I love talking about books. I'd love to hear what you got into in February. Please comment below. I love to have little chats with you, get to know you better, and find recommendations through you, because you guys have some awesome recommendations. Thank you so much for hanging out with me once again. I hope you have an amazing day or night. Until next time, cheers.